It started with a creak. Not the kind that made you glance up and forget. No, this one settled in your bones, like a slow whisper rising from deep earth. Sheriff Deputy Caleb Harlan had heard his share of creaks in 32 years on the force, but this one spoke. It came from the old Penrose farm, 10 miles outside of Elgin, Colorado. The place had been vacant since the fire in '83. Local kids dared each other to step inside. Most turned back at the porch. Some swore they saw faces at the windows. Bullshit, Caleb had always thought, until the call came in last night. A pair of teens broke in. Found something under the floor. They called it in before throwing up in the weeds. Said the boards didn't want to lift. Like they were holding something down. They were right. When Caleb stepped into the blackened husk of the farmhouse, it wasn't just the charred walls or shattered glass that stopped him. It was the smell, not rot. History. Like time itself had curled up and died inside. And then came the boards again. Moaning. He pried them up with a crowbar. There were bones. Dozens. Tiny, pale, and not quite whole. They looked like children's, but it was the pattern that disturbed him most. Arranged in spirals. Symbols. Words in a language no sane man would recognize. He stepped back, the hair on his neck bristling. And then he saw it. Etched into the beam above, they never left. The crime scene techs arrived just before dawn. Caleb watched them move like ghosts through the ruin. No one wanted to speak above a whisper, as if afraid the house might answer. Deputy Ava Sinclair showed up an hour later, younger, sharper, and already hated the cold. She pulled her coat tighter and nodded at Caleb. "You ever seen anything like this?" "Not unless you count nightmares," he muttered. Sinclair crouched near the bones, eyes narrowing. "Jesus Christ. These aren't just buried. Someone displayed them. This was a message." Caleb nodded. That's what scared him most. They found more under the living room, 3 skulls, cracked and hollow. Each had its eye sockets stuffed with cloth, as if to blind them post-mortem. "I want names," Sinclair said. "Owners, tenants, squatters. Anyone who stepped foot here since the '80s. Caleb grunted. "Good luck." Fire in '83 took most of the house and half the records with it. But Elgin had its own way of remembering. And some memories didn't burn. At the sheriff's office, Caleb dusted off an old file box marked Penrose Farm, closed. Inside were blurred photos, scribbled notes, and one yellowed newspaper clipping that stopped his breath. 3 children vanished, summer of 1982. All last seen playing by the Penrose property. Case never solved. He looked up. Sinclair was reading over his shoulder. "We just found them, didn't we?" He nodded slowly. And someone, somewhere, was watching the news reports that morning, smiling. The media storm broke faster than either Caleb or Sinclair expected. By nightfall, reporters were camping outside the sheriff's office, and a drone hovered over the scorched Penrose property. Headlines read like horror movie posters: "Child Bones in Farmhouse Hell, the Elgin Spiral Murders, Small Town, Big Secrets." Sheriff Nolan called them both in. He was red-faced, furious. "We've got 3 decades of dust, bones that look like they belong in a damn ritual, and now a dozen reporters turning this into a circus. Get ahead of it. Or I'll find someone who will." Sinclair clenched her jaw. "We need a forensic anthropologist, someone who can date the bones accurately. And a profiler." Nolan grunted. "You'll get what you get. Now go make yourselves invisible." They left the office without another word. Back in Caleb's truck, Sinclair pulled out her tablet. There were rumors back in the '80s about the Penrose kid. Elijah. Quiet, homeschooled. No friends. A cousin told police he used to bury things in the woods. Caleb stared at her. "Elijah Penrose died in that fire. His body was found." "Only partially," Sinclair replied, flipping the screen. They identified him by dental fragments. That's convenient. They sat in silence. You think he's alive? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, we need to talk to his mother. She's still alive. Living in a care facility near Boulder. Caleb exhaled. Jesus. They drove out the next morning. Frost still clung to the grass. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, hiding what they could. The care home was quiet, too clean. The kind of place that smelled of bleach and things forgotten. An orderly led them to a small, pale woman sitting by a window, watching nothing. Mrs. Penrose? Sinclair asked gently. The woman didn't respond at first. Her eyes were pale gray, clouded. Then she smiled, slow and sad. Did you come to ask about the voices? Caleb stiffened. Sinclair leaned forward. What voices? Mrs. Penrose turned her head slightly. They lived under the floor. Elijah said they hummed when they were happy. Screamed when they were hungry. The room went cold. He fed them, you know, she whispered. He said they liked it. Caleb's stomach churned. Sinclair swallowed hard. Fed them what? The old woman turned back to the window. Little things. Mice. Birds. Then, other things. He brought one of the neighbor's boys once. Said the floor opened for him. Did anyone believe you? Caleb asked, voice tight. Mrs. Penrose's eyes glittered. They called me mad. But I hear them even now. In my dreams. Elijah's voice, too. She began humming. The same low, eerie hum they'd heard under the Penrose floorboards. Later that evening, Caleb sat alone in his kitchen, staring at the old Polaroid he'd pulled from the Penrose file. It showed Elijah, age 9, standing next to the family barn. Pale, lanky, eyes sunken too deep for a child. In the photo, the barn door behind him stood slightly open, and there was something inside. A shadow. A curve that didn't belong. He rubbed his forehead. Maybe he was just seeing things now. The old case, the bones, the mother's humming, it was all starting to bleed together. The phone rang. He picked it up, still staring at the photo. Yeah? It was Sinclair. You need to see this. Now. When Caleb arrived at the office, Sinclair was already pacing near the whiteboard. The walls were covered in old photos, newspaper scans, and printed records. She pointed to a grainy black and white image from 1980, a community picnic in Elgin. In the background, barely visible, was the Penrose family. Elijah looked the same as in the Polaroid. But it wasn't the boy she wanted him to notice. Look here, Sinclair said, circling a figure standing behind the family, a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat, face obscured by glare. No one remembers him, she said. He appears in 3 photos. Never identified. He's just there. Caleb frowned. You think he's involved? I think he's watching. And not just them. Look at this. She showed a faded photograph from 1992, a school trip outside Elgin. In the corner, that same man. A decade later. The same hat. Same silhouette. Maybe it's nothing, Sinclair admitted. Or maybe someone's been watching this town for a long time. Caleb crossed his arms. You think he's still here? I think he never left. The following day, they returned to the Penrose house, this time with a ground-penetrating radar crew. The technicians, young and pale, said little as they scanned the scorched earth around the farmhouse. 20 minutes in, one of them called out. Got something here. Sinclair and Caleb stepped closer. Beneath the barn, less than 6 feet down, the radar showed a chamber, wide, uneven, almost like natural rock. But with angles too clean to be natural. And it was full of anomalies. Could be storage, one tech offered. Or a cellar that didn't survive the fire. But the readings suggested otherwise. Pockets of dense organic material. Thin, winding channels. One technician turned visibly pale. "This shape," he said quietly, pointing at the monitor. "It's like a rib cage." Caleb looked at Sinclair. "We dig tomorrow," she said. "First light." That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat with a bottle of bourbon, the Polaroid photo, and 1,000 ghosts clawing at the edge of memory. He thought of the Penrose boy. Of the shadows in the barn. Of the whispering under the floor. And he thought of his own daughter, lost 3 years ago. No answers. No closure. Just a pink bicycle found half submerged in the river, and a bedroom he hadn't opened since. He wasn't ready to tell Sinclair. Maybe he never would be. But as the wind howled outside and the bottle emptied, he heard something. Not a creak. Not a groan. A hum. Low, guttural, like someone breathing just beneath the floorboards. Caleb stood slowly. He walked across the living room, heart thudding. There was nothing on the floor. Nothing unusual. Nothing he could see. But he could feel it. Something watching. He grabbed his flashlight and headed for the basement door. Halfway down the stairs, the bulb flickered. He froze. In the dark, he heard the unmistakable sound of movement. A whisper, just ahead. "You brought them back." The dawn came gray and cold, the sky washed in bruised clouds as if the world itself had something to hide. Caleb pulled up to the Penrose farm just after 6. The radar team was already unpacking gear, and Sinclair stood near the barn, coffee in one hand, her eyes locked on the ground. She looked like she hadn't slept. He hadn't either. She glanced over. "You heard it too, didn't you?" He nodded. Neither said another word. They began the excavation with shovels, careful not to disturb the structure above. The ground gave easier than expected, as if the earth itself wanted to be opened. By mid-morning, they hit stone. A slab, flat, smooth, far too deliberate for anything natural. They cleared it carefully, revealing a sealed hatch. No hinges, no lock, just a round metal plate with a handprint burned into the center. A child's hand. Charred into iron. Everyone stood silent. Sinclair whispered, "Jesus." Caleb knelt, brushed the plate. It was warm. Without speaking, they began lifting it. What lay beneath wasn't a cellar. It was a tunnel. Wide enough for one person, the walls lined with a black stone that didn't reflect light. The air that emerged was humid, stale, and filled with something else. Not rot, not mold. Memory. Sinclair clicked on her flashlight. "We go in." The tunnel descended at a slight angle, spiraling down like a coiled spine. Every 20 feet, they passed crude symbols etched into the walls, circles within circles, eyes with no pupils, jagged shapes that looked like screaming mouths. The light seemed thinner the deeper they went. It felt less like they were moving underground, and more like they were moving backward, through time, through something older than Elgin, older than the Penroses, older than the very language they spoke. The walls began to pulse. Not visibly, no. It was something in the skin. A pressure. A rhythm, faint and slow, like a second heartbeat. Caleb stopped. Sinclair turned to him. "You feel that?" He nodded. "Like the place is breathing." They moved on. After nearly 30 minutes, they reached the chamber. It opened into a circular room, walls high, ceiling lost in shadow. At its center stood an altar made of stacked bones, animal, human, impossible to sort. Above it, hanging like meat from iron hooks, were small objects. Shoes. Dolls. Bits of cloth. A stuffed rabbit. Children's things. And behind the altar, a wall. Flat. Smooth. Black. But carved into it, in meticulous detail, was a map. Not of land. Not of roads. A map of scars. Deep cuts arranged like geography. Rivers of pain. Mountains of old wounds. Names carved in languages long dead. It looked alive. Caleb stepped forward. What the hell is this? And then the wall moved. It didn't open. It simply shifted, as if a thin membrane behind it had been disturbed. A ripple, dark and slow, passed across the map. From the center of that ripple came a sound. A hum. But this time it spoke. You brought them back. Sinclair grabbed Caleb's arm. We need to leave. Now. The hum rose in pitch, like screaming behind cotton. The chamber trembled. Dust rained down. The bones rattled. They turned and ran, the flashlight beam jerking wildly along the walls. But the tunnel had changed. What was once a gentle spiral was now a descent, steep and choked with roots. The air turned thick, burning their lungs. Behind them, something followed. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Presence. Like the weight of 100 eyes. They made it to the surface gasping, covered in soil and sweat. The radar crew rushed to help, but Sinclair waved them off. Seal it, she barked. Now. Fill it. Cement. I don't care. Caleb stood still. He was looking back at the hatch. But it was gone. In its place, just flat dirt. As if the tunnel had never been there. As if the earth had changed its mind. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. Sinclair drove back to the station like a ghost, hands clenched around the wheel, eyes forward but unfocused. Caleb rode in silence beside her, his mind still wrapped in the darkness beneath the earth. Neither of them said a word during the ride, or as they walked into the sheriff's office. But everyone could see it on their faces, something had gone wrong. The radar team packed up quietly and left. No questions. Sheriff Nolan met them with a glare. Tell me you didn't go down there. Sinclair didn't answer. You did, he growled. God damn it, you had one job, secure the site and wait for the feds. There wasn't time, Caleb muttered. There's always time, Nolan snapped. Now it's on me when something goes sideways. Caleb didn't blink. It already has. They submitted their reports, but neither included what they saw in the chamber. There was no way to explain it without sounding insane. The tunnel, the altar, the map of scars, it would be laughed out of every office in Denver. And yet, Caleb kept seeing the wall in his mind. The way it moved. The voice. That presence. He tried to sleep that night, but the whispering returned. Louder now. More insistent. Words in no language he knew, but still, he understood. They see you now. The next morning, Sinclair didn't show up to work. Caleb called twice. No answer. He drove to her place. Her car was there. Lights off. He knocked on the door. Nothing. He circled the house, spotting a glow in the backyard shed. Small, flickering. Cautiously, he stepped inside. The shed was lined with papers, drawings, maps, symbols. Dozens of sheets tacked to the walls, some torn from old books, others scribbled in marker and charcoal. In the center was Sinclair. She sat cross-legged, surrounded by candles, her eyes closed. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Sinclair, he said. She didn't react. He stepped closer. Ava. She opened her eyes, and for a moment, they weren't hers. Too dark. Too deep. Then she blinked, and the color returned. You felt it too, she whispered. Under your house. Last night. Caleb froze. What do you mean? She looked away. They're not in the Penrose farm, Caleb. That was never the only place. What are you saying? She stood, the candlelight warping her expression. I think the town is built on it. Not a tunnel. A network. It's underneath everything. Back at the station, Caleb pulled old zoning maps. Elgin was small, a single main road, a few offshoots, neighborhoods added over decades. But the oldest records, from before the town was even incorporated, showed something else. A symbol. Etched into the original land claim, a spiral like the ones on the tunnel walls. And scrawled beside it, in faded ink, "They sleep in the roots." He leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. How far did it go? Were there more chambers? More altars? More watchers? He didn't want to know. But something deep inside him, something older than fear, told him he had to. At dusk, he returned to his own home. The wind was sharp. Leaves swirled across the porch. Inside, everything looked the same. Too same. He checked the basement. Nothing. He tapped on the walls. Normal. But when he entered his daughter's room, untouched since her disappearance, the air changed. It was colder. Still. The closet door was ajar. He stepped closer. There, etched into the wood behind her toys, was a symbol. A spiral. Fresh. Not burned. Carved. Caleb stared at the spiral. It had been carved with something sharp, deliberate. The grooves were fresh, the wood still pale inside. He ran his fingers over it, half expecting a chill to run up his arm. But the cold wasn't in the carving, it was in the room itself. The air had weight, like it was watching him. He stepped back and closed the closet door. For the first time in 3 years, he stood in his daughter's room and didn't see a memory, he saw a message. He didn't know what it meant. But he was sure now, this wasn't over. It had never been over. He had just been living in the eye of something much older. He dialed Sinclair. She answered immediately. "You need to come," he said. "Did you see it too?" There was a silence on the line that told him everything he needed to know. They sat together in the room, Caleb on the edge of the bed, Sinclair on the floor by the closet. The spiral between them. "I started dreaming of them," she said. "Of the bones. Of tunnels beneath every street. Faces in the dark. Watching. Waiting." Caleb nodded slowly. "They've been here longer than we have." "Maybe longer than anything has," she replied. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, old, stained, with symbols that matched what they'd seen in the tunnel. "This came in the mail this morning. No return address." Caleb took it carefully. Among the symbols was a message in block handwriting. "You opened the first door." He looked up. "We didn't open anything." "No," Sinclair said. "But someone else did." They traced the paper's origin, but it was useless. The envelope had no fingerprints, no postal code. A dead drop, maybe. But the message was clear. This wasn't random. It was escalating. That night, Caleb sat in his car outside the library. Not the public one, the historical archives. Elgin's original town records were stored there, in the basement of an old converted church. If the roots of this thing were in the ground, maybe the truth was buried in paperwork. He convinced the old archivist to let him in after hours. She gave him a flashlight and a warning look. "You won't find anything you want down there," she said. He smiled without humor. "I'm counting on it." The basement smelled of damp stone and old glue. Rows of shelves stretched into shadow, filled with records, letters, blueprints. He found a section labeled, Pre-Founding Manuscripts. Most of it was land claims, territorial maps, early settler journals. One journal caught his eye. Leather-bound. Untitled. Faded ink. He flipped it open. August 3rd, 1852. "We have begun construction near the large rock they call Hollow's Root. The soil here is softer than expected. Digging is easy. Perhaps too easy. Last night, one of the boys said he heard humming in the trench. We told him it was wind." August 7th. Found bones. Too small for cattle. Not sure what we uncovered. We buried them again. August 10th. They won't stay buried. Caleb read the pages, heart pounding. The writer, a man named Jeremiah Callow, was part of the first expedition to settle the Elgin area. His journal described nightmares, strange shapes in the dirt, and the breathing rock they found under their tent. But the final page stopped him cold. August 21st. The tunnel opens tonight. They said I'd see my son again. I hear him calling. I go now to meet him. The rest was blank. Caleb closed the book with shaking hands. He felt watched again. He turned off the flashlight. Total darkness. And then, the hum. Soft. Distant. But this time, it came from behind him. He spun around. Nothing. But the air was warm. Breathing. And on the wall behind him, illuminated by some unseen source, a spiral began to glow. Faint at first. Then brighter. Then pulsing. A second heartbeat. He ran. Caleb didn't remember getting back to his truck. One moment he was running through the archive basement, the spiral pulsing behind him like a heartbeat made of stone. The next, he was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had turned white, his breath fogging the windshield. He didn't drive home. Instead, he found himself outside Sinclair's place again, knocking louder this time. She opened the door immediately. Her eyes were bloodshot. I felt it, she said before he could speak. Caleb stepped in and locked the door behind him. They sat in the kitchen, lights off. Only a single candle burned between them. Outside, the wind screamed like something primal. Caleb explained what he'd found, the journal, the tunnel, the glowing spiral. Sinclair listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. I don't think it wants us dead, Caleb said finally. If it did, it had chances. No, Sinclair said. It doesn't want death. It wants awareness. She placed a folder on the table and pushed it toward him. I found this, she said. I've been going through unsolved cases from the last 50 years. Disappearances. Kids. Adults. Some linked to forested areas, some to basements. The only common detail? She opened the folder. Each report had a photo attached, grainy, distorted. But in the background of every image, a spiral. On tree bark. In wallpaper. Carved into stone. Burned into a floorboard. Different states. Different decades. But the same shape. Caleb leaned forward, his throat dry. It's not just here. She nodded. It's everywhere. They made a plan. If this thing, this entity, this presence, had existed for generations, someone else must have documented it. Not in public records. In private ones. Secret archives. Cults, maybe. Or families who passed warnings down like heirlooms. Caleb remembered an old name from his early days on the force. Thomas Kincaid. Retired sheriff. Obsessed with conspiracy theories. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind after his grandson disappeared in the 70s. He found Kincaid's number scribbled in a cracked leather notebook. The phone rang 6 times. Then, speak. Sheriff Kincaid? Pause. Who's asking? This is Deputy Caleb Harlan. Elgin PD. Silence. Then, you saw the roots, didn't you? Kincaid lived alone on the edge of a canyon, in a house made of concrete and steel. No windows. 3 locks on the door. He let them in without a word. Inside, the walls were covered in maps. Strings. Symbols. Newspaper clippings going back 100 years. Everything centered on spirals. I spent 40 years trying to trace it, Kincaid said. People laughed. Then stopped laughing when the missing never came back. He pulled out a drawer filled with old journals and handed one to Caleb. These are from the Kiley family. Settlers. For generations lived in Elgin. Every child drew spirals before they could write. Said it helped them sleep. Sinclair flipped through the pages. The drawings were crude. Spirals in black crayon. But they filled every page. Sometimes hundreds of them. One entry, dated 1894, read, "They like it when I draw. It keeps them still." Kincaid showed them a photograph. Black and white. Unmarked. A small boy stood in a field, staring at the camera. Behind him, barely visible, a figure. Tall. Shadowed. Wide-brimmed hat. Caleb's mouth went dry. "It's him," he whispered. "The man from the Penrose picnic photo. From Sinclair's archive." Kincaid nodded. They called him the witness. Always there. Always watching. "What does it want?" Sinclair asked. Kincaid didn't answer right away. "Then, it doesn't want anything. It remembers." "Remembers what?" He looked up, and for the first time, they saw fear in his eyes. "What we buried." The old man didn't sleep anymore. Thomas Kincaid paced his steel-floored living room, fingers trembling as he lit another cigarette. The lighter shook in his grip. Outside, the wind howled across the canyon. He listened like it was speaking a language he'd once known but tried to forget. Caleb and Sinclair sat at the edge of the room, letting him spiral through his thoughts. "It started before the settlers," Kincaid muttered. "Before the town. Before the maps." He tapped a yellow journal with a shaking finger. "They were here when the first bones were laid in this soil. And we covered them. Buried them. Built our homes and fences and families on their backs." Sinclair leaned forward. "What are they?" Kincaid looked at her, eyes hollow. "I don't know. Spirits. Beasts. Something from beneath. I only know they were worshipped once. Federal. By who?" He chuckled dryly. "Take your pick. First it was tribes. Then the settlers. Then townsfolk. You think that many children go missing in one county by accident?" Caleb frowned. "You're saying Elgin participated?" "Some of it. Not all. But enough." He led them into the basement. Unlike the chaotic collage upstairs, the room below was cold, ordered, surgical. Metal shelves lined the walls. Boxes labeled in thick marker, altars. Route schematics. Echo cases. Sinclair ran a finger across one box. "What's an echo case?" Kincaid pulled the lid off. Inside, photographs. Dozens of them. Each showing the same thing: rooms, buildings, barns. All abandoned. All with the same spiral, carved, burned, drawn. "Places where the hum returns," Kincaid said. "Where the walls breathe." He handed them a file marked, "Rutherford Orphanage, 1964. Caleb opened it. Photos of cribs. Empty beds. A journal entry and a child's scrawl, "They sing at night." The floor is soft. Sinclair flipped through police reports. 7 children vanished from that orphanage. Only 2 were ever found. Both were deaf and mute. Neither remembered what happened. The hum was growing stronger. They felt it before they heard it now, like the air pressing into their bones. Kincaid flinched, touched his chest. "They're waking up." Sinclair whispered, "What do we do?" Kincaid's voice cracked. "We seal it. One last time. I know where the route is." They left at dawn. The route, as Kincaid called it, was located in an old cemetery 5 miles outside Elgin, long forgotten, overgrown, erased from modern maps. Locals believed it was washed away in a flood. But Kincaid had been there before. "We called it Hollow's Mouth," he said, stepping through tangled underbrush. "There was a chapel once. Burned down in 1906. But the foundation's still there." Sure enough, under collapsed stones and moss, they found what remained, a stone arch, half swallowed by soil, engraved with the spiral. Caleb dropped to one knee, brushing away leaves. There it was. A hatch. Identical to the one at the Penrose farm. Iron. Circular. And in the center, a child's handprint. Fresh. Sinclair drew her weapon. No more waiting. Kincaid brought explosives. He'd been planning this for years, he admitted, dreaming of the day he could end it for good. I was just waiting for someone to believe me, he said. They rigged the tunnel's entrance. The goal was collapse, not access. Bury it under tons of stone and flame. Make it so even memories couldn't claw their way out. As the sun rose behind them, Caleb hesitated. What if it's not enough? Sinclair looked at him. Then we go further. Kincaid handed Caleb the detonator. Your turn. As he pressed the button, the earth shuddered. A sound ripped from beneath the hatch, not a scream. A howl. Ancient. Wounded. Furious. The trees bowed. Birds scattered. The spiral on the hatch flared one last time, red-hot, then faded into ash. They stood in silence as the dust settled. Kincaid knelt. Placed his hand where the hatch had been. It's done. But even as he said it, Caleb felt it. The hum, still in his chest. Fainter. But not gone. Never gone. 3 days passed. No hum. No dreams. No whispers in the floorboards. The town seemed to exhale. The cold softened. Even the sky, perpetually gray, cleared for a while. Kincaid returned to his bunker, sealing the doors behind him. Caleb tried to go back to normal. He returned to his shift at the station, filled out paperwork, drank burnt coffee, nodded at people who didn't know what they'd been spared. Sinclair stayed in touch, but she, too, had changed. Her eyes held something now, a distance, a watchfulness. She had taken a leave of absence. Said she needed time. Maybe she was right. But Caleb knew better. He visited the Penrose farm one last time. Where the house had once stood, the ground was flat, covered in ash and weeds. Nothing marked what had been found there. No signs. No warnings. The wind was still. He stood in silence for several minutes, until something caught his eye. A single stone. Smooth, round. He knelt beside it. Someone had carved into it, a small spiral. Fresh. He didn't tell Sinclair. He didn't tell anyone. Instead, he began walking the town at night. Quiet. Observing. He started to notice things. Shadows that lingered too long in alleys. Children drawing spirals in the dirt with sticks. A shopkeeper who hummed the same 4 notes every day. An old man painting black circles on his mailbox. When Caleb asked questions, they blinked, like they didn't remember doing it. That night, he returned to his daughter's room. The spiral was gone from the closet wall. In its place, a second, smaller one, inside the first. Layers. He called Sinclair. No answer. He drove to her house. Lights off. Car gone. Inside, everything was intact, but something was missing. He checked the shed. All the pages. The drawings. The candles. Gone. He looked down at the wooden floor. A spiral carved into the grain. Tiny. Precise. She had gone somewhere. The next morning, he found a letter on his porch. No return address. No name. Inside, a photo. Black and white. Elgin, circa 1890. A street. Empty. But in the window of a building, there stood a silhouette. Tall. Still. Wide-brimmed hat. On the back of the photo, written in perfect cursive. The witness remains. Caleb drove until the roads ended. He left the car in a field, walked through pine trees until he couldn't see the sky. He found the place by instinct, a dip in the earth, silent and cool. No markers. No doors. Just a clearing. He stood there for a long time. Then he knelt and placed his palm on the ground. And waited. The hum came slowly this time. Not loud. Not frightening. It was a welcome. A recognition. He opened his eyes. Across the clearing, a figure stepped out from the trees. Sinclair. But not entirely. Her face was calm, eyes black as oil. She said nothing. Only raised her hand. A spiral was carved into her palm. Caleb stepped forward. He did not resist. The earth did not open. It accepted. And beneath the roots of Elgin, something old stirred again. Not angry. Not vengeful. Only awake.